the annual lighting of the national Christmas tree. CBS News did this special report on the pageant of peace. Behind the scenes in the White House at this Christmas time, a debate between the president and his top foreign policy advisor over when to bring the troops home from Vietnam. Privately, the president spoke of plans to visit South Vietnam in April, and then to announce that same month that he would withdraw the troops by the end of 1971. Nixon's chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, kept a tape-recorded diary and noted when National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger came to him with objections to the president's big peace plan for 1971.
He thinks that any pullout next year would be a serious mistake because the adverse reaction to it could set in well before the 72 elections. He favors instead a continued winding down and then a pullout right at the fall of 72 so that if any bad results follow, they'll be too late to affect the election. Seems to make sense.
Less than a week later, on NBC's Today Show, Barbara Walters asked the National Security Advisor whether he tried to find policies that would get the president reelected.
I would think that any president who took my advice on public opinion would be in bad shape. And therefore, I'm no expert on public opinion at all.
That same day, Kissinger made the political case for prolonging the war directly to the president. Withdrawal in 1971 might mean communist victory in 1972. Voters would go to the polls knowing Nixon had added 3 years to the war and still lost it. Kissinger's solution to this political problem was simple: add a 4th year to the war.
He prefers instead a commitment to have them all out by the end of 72 so that we won't have to deliver finally until after the elections and therefore can keep our flanks protected. This would certainly seem to make more sense, and the president seemed to agree in general.
And our greatest hope in this Christmas season and in all seasons is, of course, peace in the whole world.
But wants Henry to work up plans on it.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. I think the time has come for me as President and as Commander-in-Chief of our armed forces to lay all the pertinent facts before you and to let you judge for yourselves as to the success or failure of our policy.
The President had no intention of laying out all the pertinent facts. We now know the facts only because there were 5 microphones hidden in the Oval Office desk and 2 others in the wall lamps beside the fireplace, attached to wires running to a room below the Oval Office, where they were hooked up to 2 Sony 800B tape recorders. Nixon himself decided to have this system installed, and it really was not as dumb an idea as it sounds in hindsight. Nixon wasn't the first president to secretly record his Oval Office conversations. He was actually the 6th. His 5 immediate predecessors all had secret White House taping systems. All 5 had managed to conceal their recording, and Nixon thought he could do the same. He didn't know that one day Watergate investigators would uncover the tape's existence, subpoena them as criminal evidence, and remove them from his control. And there was one other difference. These 5 presidents all had on and off switches. Nixon's recording system was voice-activated, making his tapes, recorded from February 16, 1971 through July 12, 1973, unique. The most revealing record of a presidency we've ever had. In particular, they reveal the great differences between what the president told his closest aides and what he told the American people.
The day the South Vietnamese can take over their own defense is in sight.
The president's intention, however, was to bring the troops home shortly before or after the election, whether South Vietnam could survive on its own or not.
We gotta get the hell out of there, that's for sure. No question. I'm not going to allow their weakness and their fear of the North Vietnamese to delay us. There'll still be war out there, back and forth, but the South Vietnamese are not going to be knocked over by the North Vietnamese, not easily. Not easily. And that's all we could bring about. And that's all we can do.
Instead of following through with his Christmas plans to bring the troops home by the end of 1971, Nixon announced a troop reduction of 100,000, from 284,000 in May to 184,000 in December, leaving 157,000 in Vietnam for the start of the election year, enough to avoid a pre-election South Vietnamese collapse, while still enabling the president to reap the political benefits of a series of pre-election troop withdrawal announcements.
Tonight, I again call on Hanoi to engage in serious negotiations to speed the end of this war. I especially call on Hanoi to agree to the immediate and unconditional release of all prisoners of war throughout Indochina.
North Vietnam held American prisoners like John McCain in brutal captivity, subjecting them to torture and abuse in violation of the Geneva Conventions. Hanoi was not going to release the POWs until Nixon withdrew the troops. One time, the president seemed to contemplate abandoning his election-oriented plans to secure the POWs' freedom, but his national security advisor reminded him of the political consequences.
There's never been much of a negotiation, but I think we wanted to get down to the nut cutting. It's very much to their advantage to have a negotiation to get us the hell out and give us those prisoners.
That's right.
And we've got to do it. And, you know, if they'll make that kind of a deal, we'll make that anytime they're ready.
Well, we've got to get enough time to get out. It's got to be, because we have to make sure that they don't knock the whole place over.
But
Our problem is that if we get out, after all the suffering we've gone through,
then have it knocked over.
we can't have it knocked over brutally, to put it brutally, before the election.
That's right.
Let me turn now to a proposal which at first glance has a great deal of popular appeal. If our goal is a total withdrawal of all our forces, why don't I announce a date now for ending our involvement? If the United States should announce that we will quit, regardless of what the enemy does, we would have thrown away our principal bargaining counter to win the release of American prisoners of war.
Problem. As Senator Robert Byrd, Democrat of West Virginia, pointed out to the president at a briefing before the speech, if the communists didn't free our prisoners when we had 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam, why would they do it when we got down to 50,000? Nixon laughed about this after.
Of course, I couldn't say to him, look, when we get down to 50,000, then we'll make it straight out trade, 50,000 for the prisoner of wars, and they'll do it in a minute because they want to get our ass out of there.
It is time for Hanoi to end the barbaric use of our prisoners as negotiating pawns.
Like most Oval Office speeches, this one dominated the news cycle, with networks and newspapers repeating the presidential message.
A cut in American troop authorization of 100,000 by December 1st.
Within a day, 69% of the country had seen or heard about the president's troop withdrawal announcement, and it flipped the president's approval ratings on handling the war from 42% approval, 46% disapproval before the speech, to 48% approval and 40% disapproval after. The next day's headlines, not so good for the president. He had made his intentions a little too obvious while briefing Byrd and the other senators, who said Nixon did have a pull-out deadline, one tied to the presidential election.